Today on Curtains of Fire, we're going to be discussing the debate over police patrol oversight and fire alarm oversight. My name is Nathan Van Loon.
I'm Marsolek.
I'm Megan Kristo.
Both the police patrol oversight and fire alarm oversight are used to control bureaucracies, and bureaucracies are a system of government in which most of the important decisions are made by the state officials rather than by elected representatives. With this being said, the preferred method of making the bureaucracy accountable to democracy is through a process called overhead democracy. Overhead democracy is defined as the idea that the bureaucracy is controlled through the oversight of elected officials who are chosen by the people. This gives the populace control over the bureaucracy. Also, oversight is defined as the evaluative function of legislatures. During oversight, legislators monitor policy implementation to detect and remedy problems or violations of legislative intent. It is directed at producing information that can be used by legislators and administrators to improve policies during implementation. Mary agrees with police patrol oversight, which is the active oversight of the bureaucracy by elected officials to make sure that the bureaucracy is acting according to the wishes of the people. Megan agrees with the fire alarm oversight, and that's defined as oversight that becomes active only when there's evidence of bureaucratic wrongdoing. So now they can both give their opening statements, and Mary, you can go first.
Police patrol oversight is named after police patrol as it would be on the streets, making sure that everything is running accordingly as it should be. So there's constant supervision over legislation that is passed and over different committees to make sure that everything is running accordingly.
And I would say that I agree with fire alarm because it involves selective monitoring triggered by compliments from citizens and interest groups who bring potential problems to legislators' attention. And so we're not paying for having people always controlling and overseeing what's going on. It relies more on someone other than legislatures for surveillance, and legislatures get involved only after an alarm.
So now that we have the introduction arguments for both sides, why doesn't Mary start with pros for police patrol oversight?
Police patrol oversight is better because it's more active, direct, and centralized towards maintaining legislation. Legislators have to monitor the policies to detect problems during implementation as opposed to just responding to alarms from citizens. It works better because it allows them to know what's going on in the whole process of legislation. They aren't alarmed by things that are going wrong, and they're able to fix things as they're happening so that no major crises can occur throughout the process.
Okay, how about you, Megan? What's the pros of the fire alarm oversight?
I would say that it's better because it is more efficient for evaluating and improving policy implementation. The fire alarm policy enables congressmen to spend less time on oversight, leaving more time for other profitable activities, or to spend the same time on more personal profitable oversight activities. Legislatures spend less time on oversight because constituent volunteers generally assume the time-consuming task of monitoring implementation by waiting for alarms to sound. Legislatures also increase the political benefits of oversight. Members receive credit from constituents for interviewing to investigate the cause of their complaints. And so they're spending less time and just waiting for an issue to occur and then putting the energy into that issue.
So now we've heard the pros of both sides. Why don't we move to the cons of each and then have rebuttals after that? So Mary, why don't you start with the cons of the fire alarm oversight?
I believe that fire alarm oversight is more ineffective than police patrol oversight because it allows large problems to occur without the legislators knowing that they're happening. They're relying solely on the constituents to make sure that things are running efficiently and that money isn't being wasted and time isn't being wasted for the various bills that are passed. it allows for maybe more money to be spent in the long run because if a big problem arises, they may have to pay more to bail someone out or to fix the problem at the time than they would have to consistently be overseeing the project or legislation.
So what I hear you saying is that police patrol oversight seems to be a little more cost up front, but the fire alarm oversight seems to be more of a reactive thing. So if something bad does happen, it could be more costly.
That's correct.
Okay. So now we've had the con of the fire alarm oversight. Megan, why don't you present the cons of the police patrol oversight?
Well, Nathan, I would say that police patrol oversight is more labor intensive and time consuming than fire alarm oversight. Legislatures must establish special procedures for patrolling, which usually are a drain on the members' time. And inevitably, legislatures spend a great deal of time examining successful policies where implementation meets legislative intent and is effective.
Okay. So what I hear you saying is, yeah, it's some cost up front. It may be cheaper overall, but the legislatures don't really spend as much time doing legislative work. They're spent more time monitoring everything, and it kind of ends up being a little bit of a time waste.
Correct.
So now that we've had the cons of each side, why don't we move to the rebuttals? So Mary, why don't you rebuttal the cons of the police patrol oversight?
Megan brought up some good points that police patrol oversight can be really not cost effective, and it can take a lot of time away from legislators to actually pass legislation. But what I would say to that is that it may be more money up front to do and maintain that, but I think that constituents really want legislators who are going to follow through with the laws that they pass and make sure that things aren't going awry and that the legislation is being followed as it was passed, because if you pass the legislation and then you don't follow up on it, a lot of things could go wrong and laws can be broken, embezzling or corruption. And I think that constituents in the end would rather have maybe not the most cost effective up front, but it's better than having to bail someone out in the end with a big problem that could occur.
Those are some good points. So Megan, why don't you rebuttal to Mary's cons of the fire alarm oversight?
Well, I would say that the relevance of the fire alarm is that it deals with concerns important to constituents and it focuses on topic the legislatures can do something about, which it's also alarms are sounded by constituents, mainly organized by interest groups, whom legislative staff routinely listens to throughout the year of what's going on through legislature and other things that are occurring. And it provides formative information that identify possible problems and recommendations for changes, always changing and listening to the interest groups and what they have to say.
So Megan, why don't you give an example of when fire alarm oversight seemed to be pretty effective?
Well, Nate, I would talk about the Florida legislature in 1983, which established in its education reform legislation the Florida Quality Instructional Incentives Council to oversee implementations of the reforms for education. Now, this council member included legislators as well as representatives of the business community, and according to the council staff, shared responsibility probably reduced the time most legislators would devote to the oversight. The reporting requirements when evaluations were due was that independent evaluators were required, and the type of information that report should include completely bypassing the department by patrol strategies. And so this caused the time that legislatures would have used with the patrol police oversight. It really cut back their time that they had, and having other people responsible for certain areas was very effective.
So Mary, why don't you give an example of when police patrol oversight seemed to be pretty effective?
In Arizona, they set up a committee for the legislators to oversee a new law that was passed for teachers to try to increase teacher incentive to raise their standardized testing scores and reading levels of their students. So they set up an incentive program for the teachers where the higher their scores were, they got certain bonuses or promotions, and they had a committee that oversaw this process the entire time. It allowed the teachers to feel the pressure that they knew what they were doing was being looked at and being evaluated constantly, and the test scores for Arizona became some of the best in the country at that time under that legislation.
So today we talked about the different types of legislative oversight that there can be. Mary presented the police patrol oversight, which is more involved. There's kind of constant oversight, similar to police patrol. That's why it has its name. And she presented some good arguments. She had some good rebuttals, and she also gave an example of a time in Arizona when it was pretty effective. We also talked about the fire alarm oversight, which Megan presented, and that's more of kind of a reactive instead of preemptive like the police patrol. It's more of a reactive type of oversight. So if something does go wrong, they're able to handle it. So there's more time devoted to actual legislation instead of oversight. She also gave some good arguments and then gave another example of a time in Florida when fire alarm oversight was pretty effective. So that concludes this week's Curtains of Fire.